8:14 is the time right now, and security researchers say it was huge when it comes to being a breach. Organizations like LinkedIn, Dropbox, and Twitter suffered a supermassive data last week. Forbes and cybersecurity company McAfee reported that 26 billion leaked records were discovered, and yeah, that includes passwords, meaning many of us should be choosing new passwords in case we were part of that leak. But how do you pick a strong one? We're going to have a discussion about that in a moment. First, CBC's Jim Agapito asked you to tell the truth about your passwords.
Oh, my name is Junior.
I'm Aaron.
So how do you guys set up your passwords?
I basically have two different types of passwords, one for my personal and one for work.
Yeah, pretty much it. Same thing, ranging from kids' names, mom's names, birth years, all that jazz.
Do you think your passwords are secure?
My social, no, but my work password, big time, yeah.
Probably, yeah. But I use the two-way authenticator, so...
When you're asked to change a password, what do you do in that situation?
For my work, I do change a whole word, but for my social, I won't. I just will put an extra letter on it.
Yep, same thing. Just change the password every now and then, a couple months. Add a money sign, add a exclamation, all that.
My name is Marc.
How do you set up your password?
I used to set up the same password with every single account because I'm aging. I need to remember, same password every time.
Do you think your passwords are secure?
Yeah, I kind of feel they're secure. Nothing bad's happened yet.
You do have one. So is that one all the way across the board, including bank cards and all that stuff?
Absolutely across the board. I keep it easy.
What happens when you're asked to change your password?
I'm not a fan of that because resetting passwords involves usernames, emails. That's why I try to keep it exactly the same every time.
What happens when you do have to put up a new password? What do you do then?
What I do is I try to think of like an original password that I had back in the day. I use that, but then I have to write it down to remember.
Where do you keep that? On your phone? Do you put that? I'm curious.
I have a little notepad, and I just put it on the notepad, and the notepad sits in my office, and yeah, it works out.
My name is Lisa.
How do you set up your password?
I usually have a theme, and then I have the typical, you've got to have a capital and lowercase and numbers and the symbols, and with my theme word, then when I'm prompted to change my password, then I stick in the same theme, but similar but different.
So then how many passwords would you say you have across the board?
I would say at least 30.
How do you remember all of those?
They are written down in a special book that's hidden.
How secure do you think your passwords are?
Well, they're secure to me. I'm locked out on a regular basis, so as long as I can reset, I guess I'm okay.
How accessible is that, say, when you're out?
I have to phone my daughter and say, honey, could you check the book for me and see if you could find it? Sometimes she can and sometimes she can't.
All right, does any of that sound familiar? I bet it does. Jim Agapito from CBC talking to Winnipeggers about how you choose your passwords after this big breach last week. It's got us mindful about it. Marc Perreault is in studio and been listening in on this. Marc is the Senior Manager of Security Assurance at Mozilla. That's the company behind Firefox browser. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. What stood out from you for that where you went, oh, don't do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that it's a surprise, but it really isn't. A lot of people struggle with passwords. There are many of them that you have to have for all of your different accounts and everything else. The one I think that's the kind of the most difficult one to hear is using the same password for everything. That's extremely problematic for many reasons.
Is that more problematic than having a password that hasn't changed in like 20 years?
I mean, if it's the same one across the board, I mean, they're pretty much equal. The biggest thing is that, if you have the same password for multiple accounts, an attacker could literally figure out all the different, figure out your bank, figure out your MasterCard login, all that stuff. If you're using one password, it's pretty easy for them to just carry that password across multiple different accounts. And also, if you're using it at work, that's a problem for the workspace as well, right? So now you're jumping into a corporate environment and everything else. So it's really a big deal.
We heard people say, you and I were kind of looking at each other, I think, during this, when people were saying, well, it must be okay, nothing's happened so far. How much does a false sense of security play into things for those people that haven't change their password in a very long time, or else they do share across multiple platforms.
Yeah, so it's very similar to the way we look at corporate security as well. There's a lot of organizations that say, well, we've never been hacked, so we've been good up until now. It's the same thing with on the individual basis as well, where people just think because it hasn't happened in 10, 15, 20 years that it's not going to happen. But the reality is that because of the automation of password hacking, now and over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, and the more it evolves, the easier it is, and everybody becomes a target. So the fact that you're like, oh, I'm just someone who lives in Winnipeg, why would somebody target me? It's not that they're targeting you, it's they're targeting everyone. It's a mass, they're usually very, very large campaigns that they carry out. So if your credentials and your username show up in one of these massive breaches, attackers do what's called credential stuffing attacks, where they basically use that list and just brute force different accounts, across different services, whether it's things like Gmail or banking accounts, that kind of thing. And they have your credentials because of that leak. So
the whole password method of, adding a number, adding a letter to update the same password you've had, does that make it more secure, changing the number or the letter?
It doesn't, especially because if you have had a password, either that's, a dictionary word or someone's name, and you just keep appending different numbers and letters, there are tools that can definitely crack that, right? So especially if it's a dictionary word, or if it was something that was already in some sort of a compromised leak, such as the one that you mentioned, these tools are able to just append different characters and numbers and letters as part of their process.
Two-way authentication or fingerprints or face prints, how much more secure are those measures compared to traditional passwords?
So passkeys, like things like Touch ID, Face ID, those types of things, they work really well in the place of a password because then you don't need to remember anything. The two-factor authentication is kind of a supplement to that. So now you're using a password or one of those passkeys, and then the secondary method is, you get a text from, from the organization, or you use one of those multi-factor authentication applications. So now you have to have your password and one of those other methods of authentication. So when it comes to that, that's pretty tough for somebody else to break. That's not to say that multi-factor authentication is unbreakable. Everything's breakable.
I'm smiling at you right now because I'm thinking that sort of lets people that have weak passwords kind of get away with it in a way, because you've got that extra wall.
Yep, absolutely.
Not that I'm encouraging that.
No, exactly. But it is like if you do have a weak password or anything like that, you should absolutely be using multi-factor authentication, especially if you know you have a weak password.
We're doing a lot of coverage right now, Marc, on AI. This is the year of understanding what's going on with AI and its impact. Does it have an impact, artificial intelligence, on data breaches and guessing people's passwords?
Wouldn't really necessarily comment on that side of it. The use of the AI tools such as ChatGPT, where they become problematic is people will put their credentials in there when they're trying to fix something, when they're trying to figure something out. You don't know where that data is going to land up because of these large language models or LLMs. That data is now part of what that AI model knows. So it could appear arguably on someone else's machine, and you never know what else is linked with that data.
Various methods of remembering passwords, because that's part of why these problems all happen in the first place. Some people have the notebooks. Some people digitally have apps and places you can keep them. What's your advice about what's safest there?
So there's two different kind of options that are really great. So one is a in-browser password manager. So for example, Firefox has a built-in password manager where you can store all of your usernames and passwords for different sites, and then when you go back to that site, you basically it'll log you in on your behalf. Typically, it'll ask for like a fingerprint or something like that to be able to authenticate that it is you. The other one is there are password managers that are out of browser or like apps. So we're looking at things like Bitwarden or 1Password, where it's an app that resides on your phone or on your computer, and those integrate with things like browsers and with different websites and that kind of thing. So you can can store all of your passwords in there. You have a master password that you only really need to use, in an emergency, but typically your Touch ID, your Face ID enable you to use that app. So now you can do away with the notepad or writing down your password, and now those are in either your browser or your app, and you don't even need to remember them anymore.
What if someone's forgotten all of them and they need to start from scratch and they're stressed out and they want to start with strong passwords? Do you have is there a way to start from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I would always say to look at your most, your most valuable data assets, right? So things like your bank account, your credit card account, your email, anything that's like really, really important to you or that has personally identifiable information or financial information, and then just start there and start resetting those accounts using a password manager. And the other thing that the password managers are helpful for is they can actually like provide a strong password for you. So you don't even, again, you don't need to remember.
And they often freak us out because they're like, it'll be like, what? That's what I'm supposed to be doing with the password? Like 20 long and like all kinds of caps and lowers and numbers and, letters versus, symbols, everything, right?
Yeah. And that is the difficult part about those. The flip side to it is if you want to create your own password, we actually call them passphrases, where it's a very long string of 3 or 4 or 5 random words. So there's this funny comic out there, and basically it says to you something like random, like correct horse staple battery. 4 completely non-related words, but the amount of entropy, which is like how hard it is to actually break that password, is in the hundreds of years because it's such a long password. And that's regardless of special characters.
Better than fluffy number 1, right?
Exactly, yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate your advice around this and reminding us how important it is.
No, thank you very much for having me.
That's Marc Perreault. He's a Senior Manager of Security Assurance at Mozilla.